Hello and welcome to all my beautiful listeners. And we are here for another episode of I Wrote That, a podcast where we bring authors and industry experts together to talk about all things books. I'm here as your host, Larissa Sowen, as a book coach and ghostwriter and all-around curious person. So today I'd like to welcome Douglas Weissman. He is the author of Life Between Seconds and a graduate of the Master of Fine Arts program in creative writing at the University of San Francisco. He currently lives in Los Angeles with his gorgeous wife. Love that you made me say that. Just going to emphasize that. A fun-loving daughter, anxious dog. I have one of those, and an indifferent cat. I have two of those. And by the time we're listening to this, he's probably got another cat. So do you have another cat already?
No, I've been really working hard to make sure we're sticking it at one for now.
Oh, you got to have two. I've got two babies, and they're just ridiculous. So.
Well, yeah. Well, my daughter's 3, and she's at the point where she finally realized she can pick up the cat. And if we had a second one, I don't know if it would be as willing.
You got to get like the baby that just becomes like malleable to human interaction. Yeah. So you're an author. You were published by an indie press. I'd love to know more about, tell us what is an indie press and how did that process go for you?
Yeah. So, I mean, it was a process even before I found the indie press. So an indie press is really just a small independent press. They don't have necessarily the distribution to reach or the finances as, say, one of the big 5 publishers in North America. And even finding a press, because I was sitting there, I've had this book in my back pocket. I started writing it in 2011, and I was rewriting and querying agents to no avail. And finally, I was thinking, if I have to go through this whole process to find an agent, and then I have to go through this whole process to find a press, maybe I'll just skip the agent and go directly to a press. And I got lucky, actually. I queried about 3 small presses, and one of them was really excited and jumped on it. You don't really get the kind of glitzy and glamorous author experience when you go with a smaller independent press. There's not much room for advances if you're able to get one at all. They have, again, luckily this press has a really good distribution, and I was looking for that, right? So it could get into bookstores, it could find online platforms. So it's not just me peddling everywhere I can. And there's some backbone for them to go to, say, Los Angeles Times or the New York Times and actually get some face time with larger presses for publication for marketing purposes. But it's still a lot of my own foot traffic, right? I still have to do the work to reach out to people, reach out to podcasts, reach out to blogs, or reach out to vloggers and see, hey, can I come talk to you? You guys want to talk about my book? It's really cool. We love it. But it's kind of understanding that there's going to be more pressure on my own shoulders to push myself to get my book out there, get me out there, than possibly with one of the big 5. But at the same time, a caveat is, from what I've heard, if one of the big 5, if you go with them and they don't really believe in your book anyway, you're still going to have to put in that same work. So yeah, might as well.
Yeah, you're kind of in the beautiful both worlds, because when I talk to people that are almost religiously indie, they believe so wholeheartedly in being the masters of their own marketing plan, in the, getting to pick their own editor, getting to, decide where they distribute their book and when and what goes into it and all of this stuff. You're kind of in the middle of that, of the big 5, they control everything. You have very little say in what happens. You seem to have found a sweet spot.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, a perfect example is that artistic freedom, right? My book has a lot of variation in writing style, and I really love working with rhythm, and I really love working with juxtaposition in terms of visualization. So there's a thing with poetry where if you put really 2 unique and interesting concepts together, everybody's like, that's amazing. But when you do it in fiction, people are like, no, that doesn't work. I don't understand what's going on here. But I wanted to play with that because I love that idea. And when my editor first looked at it, there were a couple places that I directly went to see if they touched it, because I wanted that to stay the same, and they left it alone. Where I feel like if I went with a higher priority organization, one of the big 5, that would sit there and be like, no, it has to conform to these these statutes, I'd be like, I wouldn't feel as comfortable, and I want that creative freedom.
Yeah, there's this thing, like as a coach, I work with very beginner writers. They don't have books. They don't, they're not going anywhere. And, my advice, whether right or wrong, is don't break the glass ceiling as an intro writer. Because if you are looking to get published, if you're looking to market to a specific genre, they've come to expect the same thing. And that's right or wrong kind of a thing, depending on what your outcome is, because you took it a different route. You did break the glass ceiling. You went different and it worked for you, right? Yeah.
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 And I think there's actually a perfect example of that as well. I was on Instagram the other day, and this guy was just joking about walking into a bookstore. He's like, it's perfect. I always wanted to read a book about, and then he goes through like every historical fiction book on the table. And it's like a woman walking away, two women walking away, three women facing each other, but not the cover. But one of the people breaking down that joke was the fact that people come to expect certain even artwork from their particular genres. Like if you look at fantasy right now, it has a very particular visual aesthetic on the cover. And you look at historical fiction, and yeah, there's a bunch of just kind of women backs facing the cover, staring out into whatever landscape. Yeah, see? Exactly.
I'm holding up my book right now of a woman facing away.
Yeah. Free promo for you. But that's the whole thing, is like there's a very specific aesthetic happening right now. And then within the context of the book, it's a similar thing. When you're a first-time author, they kind of want you to fit into that mold, really to understand how you can market yourself, how they can market you, how kind of like what your goals are. Like, is this a long-term career, or are you just looking to publish that one book you always wanted to do and then go back to your day job? And this is my 8th book that I've published. But the other 7 were parts of book packages, right? So a publishing company was looking for writers to fulfill ideas that they had, and then they would market it. And if it became a hit, they would make all the money. And if it went to movie rights, they would keep all the rights, but my name would be on it, which would be a great boon for me. But they never really went anywhere. And I also, at the time, was such a novice. I didn't know how to market that kind of book. Like, do I put it on myself to get the word out there, or do I just let them roll with it? And it was a missed opportunity for me. And I love the experience, but at the same time, they weren't necessarily my kind of books. And it gave me a really big crash course on how to finish a book real quick, because it was basically like 6 weeks from 6 weeks for a first draft, and another 3 weeks for a second draft, and then that book was out the door, and that was for 7 books. So
wow,
it was a real quick thing, but I couldn't break the mold on that. I had to fit into a very, very tight template on that, where with this one, it's literary fiction, life between seconds. I wanted the rhythm. I had this particular story in it. And if you look at sorry, I live next to a train track. So if you hear that,
that's okay.
that is the hourly train rolling by. But if you look at kind of the core concept of Life Between Seconds, it fits into the literary canon, just in terms of it's quieter that way. It's not like there are people looking to attack or murder my main characters, but it does have. So in that way, it's literary fiction, but at the same time, it still works in a lot of different ways, where the language is beautiful, which is literary, but there are these aspects of thriller or intrigue that don't necessarily always come with literary. And then magical realism, which I am always a big fan of and try to fit into anything that I do. And you'll see agents, editors are always like, ooh, we're looking for cross genre. That's really in right now. We're looking for things that you can't fit into a tight mold. It's like, but not really. You're looking for things that still fit into one mold, but you can kind of cross over into another one, where it's like, this is a thriller with elements of romance. Where it's like, yeah, but aren't most thrillers with elements of romance? The hero falls in love with whoever they're protecting, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it's a hard tightrope to navigate, especially when you're first starting out.
Mm-hmm. It is. It totally is. And I think a lot of writers, it can do 2 things to the confidence of a writer. It can make you feel pigeonholed, where you don't feel like you're getting to truly tell your version of the story. Or it can lay out exactly what your story needs to look like. And it can help with that framing and that outlining work, because you're going to take it through, the 5 stages of a story, the rising, the action, the climax, all of these things. It gives you the framework. So I think depending on, how you come into this, like if you have a story idea like you did, and what you want it to say, but it doesn't fit the conventional mold, go for it.
Yeah.
We're not saying it can't happen. If you have an idea, then break that glass ceiling, go for it.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest mistakes that a lot of first-time writers make early in their career or before their writing career has started is that they concentrate too much on doing things they hear other writers say they should do, but not without knowing really how to do it, and thinking that they're the ones who are going to break the mold on their first try, right? Like, never start a story with dialogue. It's like, oh, but mine is different. Well, 99% of the time, it's not different, right? Or start the story with action. So many writers, especially fantasy writers that I see, try to start like inside a battle. It's like, that's starting with action. It's like, but it's not really, because you don't really care about the characters. So yeah, you're in a war, but it's like the war's 1,000 miles away, so it doesn't really affect you as a reader. And so it's like these really tough rules, or let's say guidelines, that other writers or editors or publishing houses put out there to try and guide people. Yet at the same time, it's like, as new writers, you think, well, I'm doing this because this is what it says, without really understanding what it means, or thinking that you're going to break that rule because you have something different and unique. But really, it is something that you should try fitting into the template at that time, and then seeing as you go, maybe I can break it here. Now that I know the rules and why they exist, maybe now I can start breaking them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my favorite one is the show don't tell methodology. And when I was writing my book, my sci-fi book, I thought about this really hard, because in sci-fi, you really need to show, like, you are building worlds, you're building magic systems. You'll bore readers if you just tell them about it, right? It's not a textbook. But there is a time and place to tell. And I think one of my favorite books, the Pierce Brown Red Rising series, does an amazing job of telling his scenes. When, his book is about character development and growth and things like that. But his book has a lot of battle scenes in it. And honestly, it was so refreshing to be like, they fought and they won. It wasn't, a full chapter of description into this battle that didn't really matter. It wasn't adding anything to my story. And it was so refreshing. So that is my favorite piece of contrary advice. Like, there is a place to tell in your story.
Yeah. I mean, there was that's the thing that I feel like gets overblown. Show versus tell. Like, yes, it's so important to show, but there are moments when you can just tell, but it's not usually the moments you think of, right? It's like that, where maybe you have this big epic battle, but if the big epic battle is going to take up 20 pages and not really add anything to the story, especially when it's at a point where the victor is going to be victorious anyway, then it's not heightening tension, it's just taking up space. Yeah,
exactly.
Totally agree. There was this book, it came out, I'm trying to remember correctly, but I think it was like 18th or 19th century British Gothic, called The Monk. And it was kind of my first experience remembering that kind of thing that you're describing. And it's about this monk who's kind of tempted by, and he's kind of the pinnacle of piety. And then that idea, kind of like Job, where the devil tries to turn him and see what it takes to turn him away from God. And he ends up going mad and trying to ravage this girl. But in that scene where he finally descends into madness, it says something so simple along the lines of like, and she wasn't a flower anymore, or something like that. Just like one simple line, rather than going into this whole just explicit thing that wouldn't have added anything, where that one line, even though it's telling, just sums it up and still gives me chills. At the time, I was like, why didn't they go into it? But now, as a storyteller breaking the whole story down, I realized like that one simple line is the one line that stuck with me in the whole entire book.
Because it stood out, right? It was different. It was a new approach to it. Yeah, I love that. Let's talk about, I think, every reader's favorite question if they know an author. Do you write about real people in your books? Do you build them into your characters?
100%. And I guarantee you and everybody listening that any writer they know definitely uses them as a character too. It might not be fully, but some aspect of them. And that's what I do. I never model a character directly after one person. So it's not like, oh, this is totally my mother or this is totally my wife. But I do think that I take aspects of the person, be like, oh yeah, this is, something my grandmother said to me, and this character is totally going to say it, and they're going to have that kind of feistiness, but they're also going to have this this kind of quiet intensity that my professor of English had in my 10th grade year or something like that. And it helps me build a more dynamic character rather than a caricature of one of my family members or one of my friends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's it kind of reminds me, I don't know when I heard this or where I heard this, but even if it's right, but let's pretend it is. But you can't dream about somebody that you've never seen. Like you can't create a face in your imagination if you've never seen one. And it's the same with characters. You are not going to be able to create something that you've never been exposed to before. You have to have seen that type of personality on TV, interacted them with in life, heard them on radio. And then you take all of those beautiful little chunks of that person and you create them into a new character. And this is very similar to that.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, I think it's, and you tell me if I'm wrong here, but so far, and you might be the first one, but so far, every writer I've ever met with their first book, their protagonist is a veiled version of themselves. And it doesn't matter if they're writing literary fiction, sci-fi, fantasy, their protagonist is always a version of themselves. And it happened with me too, with this book, Life Between Seconds. One of the main characters started out as a version of me and quickly unfolded into something different, but still has those elements. Like they're a traveler and I'm a travel writer. And so those elements stayed with him, but at the same time, he became someone who's more timid, who's more, I'm very, I'm goofy in a lot of ways, but he's a different type of goofy, right? So it's just kind of instilling him with those differences that I could model after other people that I knew, kind of balancing some of my best friends into this person for an amalgamation of a more rounded character rather than just being like, oh, he's me. And then when he was me, it was actually harder for me to write him than when I started making him someone completely different.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I 100% agree with that. My sci-fi book, The Defender, she is me.
Yeah.
But the beauty of her, she's me in the beginning. And, she is anxious, she's depressed, she's unsatisfied, she's all of these things. And what I found so therapeutic about writing her is that, your characters have to grow, they have to evolve. And so I had to force her to evolve. And like we were talking earlier, I gave her side characters that helped her get there. But in her growth, I grew, right? Because again, I couldn't create somebody that I had no experience with. I had to grow with her. I had to experience what she experienced. Obviously, I didn't travel planets and like meet aliens, but emotionally.
We didn't know that until you said that just now.
That's true. My book has time travel and space travel involved in it. And my husband always asks me, like, are you because I'll just give you a little background in my magic system. When she's pulled away from Earth by her stone set, her magical devices, Earth's timeline stops. So her timeline continues, but the Earth stops. So her husband and her child are frozen. And so he's always asking me, like, were you gone for like a year and we just never noticed? Kind of.
Yep. You never would have known if you didn't say one way or the other.
That's right. And I can't admit it. So you still don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And sidebar, I am obsessed with magic systems. I just have to tell you. And my most recent blog post on my website was all about magic systems. And I love them. I don't write necessarily in sci-fi or fantasy, but I always take this idea of magic and the need to understand the tiniest details of a magic system into how I create worlds, even if it's the world in which we live. Because a great example, one of my favorite examples is like Harry Potter, they still use candles, right? And you kind of think, well, they have all this magic. Why don't they just use light bulbs, or why don't they just use their wands to create light? But then you have to dig deeper, like, well, someone makes those candles, and there's an entire economy based upon these candles existing in the magical universe. Therefore, if you take out the candles, what does that do to the economic system? How many people are out of a job? And I'm like, oh my goodness. But that's how you create worlds, through magic systems. You have to understand the finer details, even if they don't go into the actual book. So I'm always thinking about, like, all right, well, if this was a magic system, what would be the details to go into this thing? Like, yeah, he's just sitting at a table in a coffee shop, but all of a sudden it takes on new meaning when you think about the people who made the table and what the economy's like in the area they made the table and why the coffee matters. And even though it never goes into the book.
Yeah, totally. It's such an interesting way to think of it. And I think as an author of my own magic system, I took it for granted. It came very easily to me, and it was my beta readers that pointed out that, like, pieces just didn't make sense, because in my head they made perfect sense. Like, again, she's pulled away from Earth's timeline stops, and it was like, well, yeah, I'm gonna need a little more than that. What do you mean? Like, what's happening? Is the whole Earth frozen? It's just their timeline. And I just took it for granted. And I actually bought a book. CJ Rowanson had published a book about magic systems and creating magic systems and, like, what goes into them. And I used that as the framework for developing it. But you don't have to do that. If you want to have a simple magic system, not everybody's going to look at it like you do and analyze it to death. Some people just go for the surface level. So
I get a bit obsessed, and I totally understand that. It's just the way I love to break down and see how things work. But in the same way that your beta readers kind of approached you and said, well, how does this work? We need more here. Yeah, I had a writing instructor who looked at me with the magical realism aspects of when I was writing Life Between Seconds, and basically said, it's not about how it works. It's about, if it's magical realism, how does it look to somebody on the outside, right? So there's a scene, as an example, where two characters are arguing in a rainstorm. And then as the argument heats up, the water starts rising. And then when the argument kind of reaches its peak, a wave comes through and rushes one of the characters away from the street, kind of in the same vein of her just storming off, but now she's getting washed away and the argument's not resolved. But if somebody's watching this argument from, say, a third-story window and just seeing two people argue in the rainstorm, how does it look to them? Is the water actually rising? Does the wave actually take her away? Or do they just see two people arguing in a rainstorm and her stomping away? So it's like, that's what you have to imagine, even if just using magical realism, or even if just doing a real life perspective in a story. It's like, well, how does it look necessarily to the outsider? What are the dynamics or logistics of the scene that make it needed for this to happen in this space? Otherwise, it could be anywhere. You could be doing anything. The setting has to matter and the dressing has to matter. Otherwise, what's the purpose of mentioning it?
Yeah. Totally. What is the purpose of mentioning it? I love that, because it goes back to the show versus tell. Is it adding to your story? Yeah. That's so great. Let's talk about writer's block.
Let's not, because everybody, it's a scary thing.
It is a scary thing. And, I was actually talking to a woman yesterday, and she said she's never experienced writer's block. And I was like, girl, you are one in a million, because, like, everybody I know experiences writer's block. How do you deal with it?
Yeah. So I feel like I approach it in different ways when I try to understand what type of writer's block I'm approaching. Because I think for me, I get writer's block in different ways, right? There's the inner critic writer's block, which is the inability for me to get past that voice in my head saying, don't write anything, it's going to suck anyway. And why are you even bothering? Versus the writer's block of, oh my goodness, I don't know what to say next, or like what chapter I'm going to write next, versus the writer's block that's just like, well, I'm out of ideas. So all three things, usually a walk helps me with either one of those, but sometimes a walk just doesn't do it. And I mean, I love walking, I love being outside, and you talk to so many writers or read throughout history, writers who just took a walk every day or went out in nature for 10 minutes or something to help them. And I feel like that still holds true, definitely for me. But beyond that, there are a few like logistical things I actually use to help me. One of them is I do 10-minute free writes. So or maybe not a free write, I guess, because I use a prompt, but I'll only do it for 10 minutes because especially during the pandemic where, I had lost my job. I'm working like 6 freelance jobs at the same time. I'm still trying to have family time with my wife and family time with my daughter, who at the time was, around 2, give or take a few months. And at the end of the day, I was just so burnt out, but I needed to write something. And a friend of mine was like, oh, let's just, try for 10 minutes and we'll just stay accountable to each other. I was like, okay. And then when she kind of dropped off, I still did 10 minutes a night for 6 nights a week and was able to finish a complete book on it. And I was able to sell that book, which is going to come out either late this year or early next year. So it worked for me. And I realized it worked so well that it's something that I just continue doing. I just have a prompt, and for 10 minutes, doesn't matter what it is, I can just keep going because anybody can write for 10 minutes. And because I have a prompt, I'm not worried about what's coming out. I'm not worried about where it's going to go. And I also fear the alarm, right? It's like, oh, I only have 10 minutes. I don't have time to panic, right?
Mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm.
that's for me, that worked the best. And for other people, it could be, focusing for 2 minutes or for an hour or stepping away completely, watching a movie. That sometimes helped me in the past too. There's like 3 movies that I'll return to that just make me feel inspired, that then I'll come back and be like, okay, now I can do something for this amount of time. At the same time, I'm working right now on a YA novel I call it, it's Breakfast Club meets Great British Bake Off. And I was so into it for a little while, and I kind of reached that midpoint where there's kind of a sag, and it's like, am I still invested in it? And then I just spent like, I don't know, 2 or 3 months watching every single episode of the Great British Bake Off over and over again, calling it research when really I know it was just procrastination. So there does come a fine line when you have to sit there and like, all right, well, maybe this isn't working anymore and I have to do something different because this writer's block is getting to me and I notice.
Yeah. I love that. That's 2 very good techniques that are so common amongst writers. I'll share my 2 as well. So I do rapid fire brainstorming with my husband. So I'll come to him like, this is I don't know what to do, or I'm too overwhelmed with all of the options kind of a thing. And we'll sit down for kind of like what you said, about 10 minutes, and we will just go, okay, what if this, what if this, what if this, what if this? And then what often happens is, in any marriage, no, that's a dumb idea. I'm obviously not doing that. So I actually like weed them down to like, well, obviously this is the only thing she could possibly do in this scenario because all the rest sounds silly. And then my other technique is I often have multiple projects on the go as a coach, as a business owner, as a ghostwriter, as all of these things. I have multiple creative outlets that I can go to. So like I'm working on my memoir right now, which is quite an exhaustive process to write that book. And I get stuck a lot because it's too emotional. It's too, fragile to go down that road. So I'll go back to my sci-fi book and I'll pick it up and I'll start editing that again, or I'll switch to, my blog posts and I'll write a blog post. And I find just pulling the attention away from where you're stuck can often reignite your passion to want to go back.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've found that as well when I work on different projects. I think my biggest issue is if I try to do 2 fiction projects at the same time, right? So because I'm a travel writer, so it's like I can move to the travel writing space, write a travel essay, come back and work on the novel, or come back and work on editing something different. But when I'm like, oh, I'm stuck on this novel, so I'm going to go work on this other novel. And then all of a sudden I'm like, no, I don't have the stamina, the strength, or the focus to do that either. But then I just, the cycle of tearing yourself down is real. And so I have to break myself of that, because that leads to another type of writer's block that essentially goes back to the inner critic, and I kind of have to stop it in its tracks, where it's, be forgiving, be understanding with yourself. You have to kind of sit there and say, it's okay. Like you don't need to beat yourself up when you definitely shouldn't beat yourself up, because all it does is make you feel worse and make you not want to write. And then it's this whole downward spiral.
Mm-hmm. It's imposter syndrome at its finest.
Oh,
right? Yeah, it's brutal. It is absolutely brutal. I think I could spend another full half an hour on imposter syndrome and like how to tell that little voice to go away. But let's wrap up with you have a blog and you are open to blog swaps. So I really want to touch just a tiny bit on the power of cross marketing for authors and exposing yourself to other people's audiences. And podcasts are a wonderful way to do that. That's exactly how you and I connected. You come on my podcast and all of a sudden you're introduced to an entirely new audience. Blog swaps are really great. Social media swaps are really great, where you find somebody that has an audience that is in your niche or your genre and you leverage their audience. And this is the foundation of my business, is to do swaps like this. And it is so welcoming. Like at first when somebody said, like, when somebody was, coached me to ask people to host me on their site, I was like, why would anyone do that? Like there is nothing in it for them really, unless you have like affiliate programs set up. But my world was rocked when I found out how welcoming people were. And I now extend that same service of like, there's nothing in it for me other than to help you. And that's enough. Right.
Yeah. I mean, you put it so beautifully. I'm a bit more selfish with it. Be like, well, this is great because it's one time I don't have to worry about writing a blog as well. So it's like, but it's such a beautiful ecosystem, really. And I think that other people do understand how hard it can be to grow your audience and how welcoming or welcomed they were into the space when they were first starting. Because usually it's very rare that I've experienced people to not be helpful, where even if they were not necessarily receptive to the trade idea or the guest post idea, they were still very humbled and welcoming, but for whatever reason, it just didn't work out. Maybe it was the focus of the article, or maybe they just didn't have any space for new guests because they only allowed certain numbers a year. So it's been such a beautiful experience and really one of encouragement and support.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Yeah. So you're offering this kind of support, your lazy man's approach to not having to write a blog, but
Yes.
We'll post a link to where do we want to send people to reach out to you?
Yeah, so you can reach me on LinkedIn, Douglas Weissman. I am very active there. I'm posting all the time there every day. Or you can reach me through my website. You can submit and contact me there pretty easily. It's just douglasweissman.com. And otherwise, the other social media platforms, I'm usually on Facebook, Instagram, both my names, Douglas Weissman. Luckily, my name is not that common, so I was able to grab all these handles before anybody else did.
Yeah. Awesome. So, and we'll post all the links. We've got your website. We've got your book links. We'll post all of these in the show notes. So you can just head there and find ways to contact him. So if you are looking to do a blog swap where you get your book and your message in front of, Douglas's audience, then he is certainly open to that. So that's totally great. Well, thank you so much, Douglas. This has been an amazing chat.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I had a really good time.